Show. Our next guest is a Sudanese-Canadian writer, political commentator, and podcast host who emigrated to Canada at the age of 12, settling in Kingston, Ontario.
In his new book, titled Son of Elsewhere, a memoir in pieces, he shares his extraordinary journey of growing up in a new country and trying to fit in while still carrying memories of life in a different time and different place. Welcome to the show, Elamin Abdelmehmoud.
Hi.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good.
Great.
And we said book, but maybe, one day.
Maybe a show, maybe a movie.
Yeah.
We see it.
I love this. I love this energy. This is great.
I love that because the title is so evocative, Son of Elsewhere.
Thank you.
So what does elsewhere mean to you? What is that place? Where is that place?
Well, so I moved here when I was 12, which is a really sensitive time, a time when you just want to kind of blend into the background. Hopefully nobody notices you, And so I sort of put a lot of my identities on the shelf. But by that I mean my blackness, my immigrantness, my Sudanese-ness, any of those elements. And so when I was returning to what it means to put parts of yourself on the shelf, I really wanted to kind of grapple with this idea of, well, where is home? Is home here or is home Sudan? I kind of keep bouncing back and forth in between. And so I just wanted to claim that in-between space and say, it's okay for the in-between space to be this other thing. It doesn't have to be, undefinable. Let's give it a name. Let's give it sort of, I guess, an emotional understanding. That's what I was trying to get at with Elsewhere. Yeah.
And in the book you write, it took 2 stopovers and 19 hours of total flying time to become black.
Yeah.
So what was that realization like?
So, I've had this skin color my whole life, but it has not had all the meanings that it has in this country or in North America. So I came to this country. I had a cousin who said, hey, by the way, over here we're black. And that means, we're going to listen to Lauryn Hill and Nas. And I was like, I want none of this. I sort of ran away from blackness at first because I grew up in this relatively conservative sort of Muslim Sudanese home. And so the only depictions of blackness that I saw were on TV. They were like Ja Rule at the time, And I thought, if this is black, I want no part in this. And so I actually spent quite a bit of time, I would say, not attaching myself to the black identity. It took me a little bit, of time to come back around and kind of figure out my way through it.
Oh, I love all of this identity talk. So how did you bridge the gap between these two identities then? The one that you came with from Sudan and then this identity, as you were saying, that you were kind of handed at the airport when you arrived?
I mean, it takes a bit of time, right? It takes a bit of time to sort of at least grapple with your own position in relationship to those identities. And so for me, way later, I started reading about the deep, long, rich black history of in Canada and in North America, and spending more time about that. Sort of pop culture was a really key way of entering that, whether it's, something like hip hop or just generally watching movies, music. Those sort of became the keys that unlocked those doors for me. So grateful to be living in a time when, someone like Beyonce is giving a really strong iteration of what blackness could and does look like. By the way, shout out Beyonce, new song tonight, just so you know. In case you don't know, man, it's tonight. It's happening tonight. Yes, 100%.
Hot tip. Hot tip.
Hey, as an outsider who was trying to fit in, you speak about pop culture, but you also talk about wrestling. So how did wrestling get you feeling kind of more on the inside of things?
Well, I thought only the cool kids watched wrestling, which I found out later was maybe not the case. But at first, I sort of wanted to attach myself to just some new friends in Canada, and I sort of zeroed in on a couple of people who watched wrestling kind of casually, and they were the first people to ever come to my house as an immigrant, and I was very nervous about this. I was like, what do I do when I have these white people over to my house? How does this feel? And so wrestling became the first doorway to that. But then later, I would sort of spend a lot of my high school writing what is essentially wrestling fan fiction, but basically developing the background stories of all these wrestlers, and at first it's like you're trying to imagine scenarios of wrestlers that already exist, but then later on I made up my own characters, and I was like, oh, let's send them to the zoo, or let's send them to different scenarios.
Is there a name that you want to share?
There's this guy, man, Taylor Stanton was one of the first guys that I sort of wrote. We're talking thousands of words every week writing wrestling fan fiction. But then that kind of gave me the practice to do some writing, because when you're writing fan fiction on the internet, I don't have to worry about my accent. I don't have to worry about my presentation. I don't have to worry about the way that I present myself. I could just let my wrestling character sort of speak for me. And it sure did for a real long time.
Oh my gosh, I feel like we're already best friends, but like we're gonna have a whole other side convo after this is over.
What about
Let's
wrestling?
go. I'm ready.
The heyday in wrestling.
Really? I didn't know
Wait,
that
what's your
about you.
era? Is
Oh,
it,
yeah.
like, who are your people?
Jake the Snake.
Sure.
Obviously, Ricky Macho Man Savage. Like,
Sure.
listen, we could just go. We
yeah,
could go.
let's go. I'm
That's
ready.
A whole other
yeah, that's the
segment.
rest of this show. Let's go.
You know, Coco Beef. Anyway,
Yeah.
all of that stuff. Okay. I do want to talk about because you brought up a wrestler's name, but it actually triggered something because you had nicknames growing up in Kingston, and one of them was Stan.
Yeah.
Not your name.
Yeah.
Stan, and another one was Oreo.
Sure, yeah.
So what did these names mean to you? What's the backstory on those?
Well, I mean, like Oreo is sort of like a regularly used, but you might call it insult actually, like when you're referring to a black person who's black on the outside, white on the inside, which is to say, like it's someone who's kind of orienting themselves as close to whiteness as possible. But during this period of time, I saw that as maybe a badge of honor because I was like, oh, I'm passing. I'm convincing these people that I'm not an immigrant, that I'm not black, that I'm sort of rejecting those other parts of my identity in favor of something else. And so for me, like, when I was called Oreo, I sort of saw that as a badge of honor. And I sort of, it wasn't until much later that I thought, you know, I'm not sure this is such a good thing, but I still kind of view that with like a bit of empathy, a bit of sympathy for that younger self that needed to feel like they belong in like whatever way that belonging might be. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Yeah.
This is Emlo. I'm Muffy. So you say that the first friend you ever made in Canada was
Yeah.
the 401.
Sure.
Yeah. What?
Everyone's favorite highway. Yeah, of course.
Sure.
I am really fond of the 401 because, you know, I landed in Pearson. For me, my first impression of this country was driving on the 401 from Pearson to Kingston. And it was there that I was sort of beginning to get my handle on, hey, what does it mean to be living in a place like Canada? And part of that was, you know, the very first time that my dad pulled off the highway to go into Tim Hortons. And I was like, I don't understand anything that we're doing here. But then I heard my dad speak English for the first time because I hadn't seen him for 5 years. And I was like, I had to reintegrate my own ideas of who my father is, suddenly with a new language and a new way that he moved in a new space. And so for me, like the highway was witness to a lot of that turmoil, whether it's like the initial turmoil of landing here for the first time, but also the turmoil of later, you know, my parents for a period of time not really like agreeing with my relationship and having to visit them back and forth and like, you know, driving home crying while like thinking about all the ways that our relationship has changed. So for me, the 401 has been witness to some of the most difficult and also most transformative moments in my life. So for that reason alone, I can't be too mad at the 401. I know other people can, but I can't.
That traffic.
Yeah.
You speak about your father, but you also wrote about your relationship, you know, with your parents growing up. You leaned towards being white on the inside, like you said, to try to keep your, and they wanted to sort of try to keep you closer to your Sudanese identity. So how did that affect your relationship?
I mean, it didn't go great. You know, it was a period of a lot of tension, I would say, because for them it was really important that I sort of stick as close as possible to my Sudanese roots. But at the same time, you could sort of see and feel the push and pull. Like for them, they were noticing all the ways I was beginning to change. I was sort of beginning to orient myself to this new place and learning how to call that home. And so all of those things for them, they weren't easy to watch. You know, my parents weren't at my wedding, for example. My mom was at my wedding, but my dad didn't come to the wedding because I married a woman who's not Muslim, and he really had a hard time with that at the time. He would later, you know, give a really heartfelt and beautiful apology, but it took some time for him to get there. But we're still figuring out our way through it. You know, it's not perfect. I don't think that this book ends with like everything is great now. It's more just like we're trying to reach each other, and that's part of our conversations all the time.
Yeah, I think thematically there's so much in this book. I think that either immigrants, children of immigrants, I think there's a lot in here.
Yeah.
What do you hope that readers take away from your book?
I think sometimes we think about some of these identities as really, really solid. Ideas like blackness, ideas like immigrant, ideas like Muslim. And maybe one of the things that I'm trying to advance with this book is that, you know what? All of the people who even identify themselves with those identifiers, they don't even feel that solid in relationship to them all the time. You know, like I think my relationship to blackness changes all the time. Same way that I think my relationship with Muslimness changes all the time. And so maybe to complicate how solid we think those ideas are, that's kind of part of what I'm trying to do with this book. So I hope that comes across.
Book
Amazing.
to TV show to movie.
Yeah,
and
speak on
beyond.
it. Speak it out loud. Thank you.
Elamine, thank you so much for being here today
you.
and really sharing your story with us and your wrestling story. I can't wait for that conversation to happen.
That's happening after
backstage.
this.
100%. I'm ready.
The book is called Son of Elsewhere, and it is out now. We will.